are in the technical team in the background who will help us pick up the questions and convey those questions to you. I just wanted to do a quick sound check before we start. Hello, Senior Counsel.
Yes, hello, good morning, Silas.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, Dr. Akombe.
Good morning, Silas. How are you?
Hi, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Ms. Roslyn Odede, are you there?
Hi, how are you?
Great, loud and clear. Dr. Odote? Dr. Odote, are you there?
Yes, Silas, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, great. So I think with that sound check, we are good to go. Yes, please wait for the...
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar as we tackle the very important issue of the BBI and elections. Today in studio, my name is Jane Muhea. I'll be moderating this session alongside my colleague Silas Kamanza. Silas.
Thank you so much, Jane, for this introduction. My name is Silas, and I'll just to start is to remind you that the fact that elections in Kenya are always a very emotive subject, and this is because elections in Kenya have been always conducted against the backdrop of tribal blocs and ethnic divisions. As such, elections have perpetually been accompanied by electoral violence, conflict, loss of property, and death in the country. Since the first general election in 1969 and every subsequent 5-year cycle, Kenyans have systematically witnessed electoral violence, elusive electoral justice attributed to the design of the poor electoral system in the country. Of course, and its attendant outcomes. These are issues that were highlighted in the BBI report, and these were issues that actually informed the BBI agenda.
Yeah, right, Silas. Today in the BBI report and the proposals, it contains a raft of recommendations on the chapter on the representation of the people and makes various proposals that will change the electoral design in this country, that will change the composition of the IEBC and how the commissioners are appointed, and also will change the representation of the people in the two houses. Amongst these recommendations that we'll be highlighting today are the proposals on the change, on the tenure and membership of IEBC, the manner and the process by which IEBC commissioners are appointed. There is also the issue of changing the allocation of seats amongst political parties on the basis of total votes garnered and not as we currently have it, which is now based on the number of seats that a political party wins. Another proposal in the BBI is the changing of the composition of the two houses of parliament, that is the National Assembly and the Senate. And the goal here was to streamline the two-third gender role. So the proposal now is to delete the women representative seats as we now know them, and to have Senate be constituted by persons who are elected from each county, where each county elects a woman and a man. Then there are also issues around the governors will now be required to nominate their deputies based on gender. So if you're vying as a man, you're required to appoint a woman to be your running mate. There is also the issue of altering the qualification and the disqualification for election as members of parliament. So these are just a highlight of the many issues that the BBI report seeks to bring about in the constitution as we move forward. Simon?
Thank you, Jane. To start off, I will introduce the panelists briefly. Joined with us is Dr. Rosalina Kombe. Dr. Rosalina Kombe is a legal expert and the former IBC commissioner, joining us all the way from New York. Thank you so much, Dr. Kombe, for finding time to join us, especially at this time. I think it should be about 3 a.m. there. Thank you so much for that. With us is Dr. Collins Odote, who's a scholar and election expert, and also representing the academia. Ms. Rosalyn Odede, a governance expert and a gender expert. With us also is Senior Counsel, Senator Okongo Omogeni, the Senator of Nyamira County and former LSK Chair, having served from 2007 to 2010. To kick off our conversation, we had a BBI, we've had the Building Bridges initiative. To start our conversation, Senator Okongo Omogeni, what are your thoughts generally on the BBI, but particularly maybe you can share your thoughts on the proposed changes in the composition of the Senate and National Assembly, and whether these recommendations in the BBI guarantee that elections are actually inclusive in the country. Over to you, Dr. Omogeni. Please unmute, Senator. We can't hear you. Thank you. We still can't hear you, Senator. All right. As Senator fixes that, I'll go straight to Dr. Roslyn Akombe. Dr. Akombe, you are an IBC commissioner just a while ago, and just to share your thoughts on the BBI report generally, and maybe you can share your thoughts on the proposed changes to the manner of appointment of and the composition and the tenure of IBC commissioners. As you share your experience with us, over to you, Dr. Akombe.
Thank you very much, Silas, and thanks, Jane, for hosting these conversations. You know, I was when I was approached by George Kegoro, to participate in this panel, I was obviously hesitant. As you know, I have actually not participated in any panel or provided any interview on my role as a former IBC commissioner since the 1st of November, 2017. So I was a bit hesitant, but when George Kegoro asks you to do something, you really can't say no. So really thanking you for the opportunity to share my views, and again to restate that the views that I'll be expressing are my personal views and are not views of any institution that I belong to or work in at this moment. And just really privileged to be in this panel with my senator, by the way. Senator Mogeni is my senator from Nyamira, my other home. I have several homes, so Nyamira is one of those. So glad to be in the same panel with him, but also glad to be in a panel with really distinguished people like Dr. Udote, you know, the lawyer Roslyn Odede, who I was so excited when I saw her being interviewed for the IEBC Commission, and I was looking forward really to working there under her leadership. But then politics is politics. And really just look forward to a very good conversation. So, you know, my general views on the BBI really goes to a lot of points that many of us who were in the fight for having a new Katiba from the 90s up to 2010, when we got a new Katiba, have been saying. That we had a process that was people-driven, that was as a result of broad consultations, as a result of blood and lives lost in the streets, as we fought as student leaders, as we fought as civil society, as we fought as political parties to have the 2010 constitution. We all recognize it is not a perfect constitution because it was a result of a political compromise. And you would expect then that such a people-driven process, if you're going to make amendments to about 14 out of the 18 chapters of that constitution, that you would actually have a process that is a legitimate process, that is a people-driven process, that is consultative, and there is not a deal between two political elites who had fallen out because of a political contest, and bringing the changes, not because honestly they will fix the problems on electoral justice, not because they will fix the issues of the integrity of the elections, but because this is really what we've been saying. It's a political bargain of the elite. So just flagging there that in terms of the process itself, it's a process that has been an informal process. It's an extra constitutional process that is not based on law, that is not based, whether it's on the expenditure, whether it's on the selection of the people who have been doing the process, but it is a process that is unconstitutional, that is illegitimate, that is illegal. And so in my view, you cannot have an unconstitutional process, an illegitimate process, and then try to make legal changes or constitutional changes to it. And so there is a problem in a whole in terms of just the process of the BBI and coming to that. But when you even look at and I'll be very specific only to issues of electoral justice, issues of electoral integrity. So when you look at actually the proposals that are being put forward, and you even look at them as an academic, if I just look at them as an academic who looks at it, that the reason why we ended up having the BBI, and by the way, I'm not a lawyer. I am a political economist by training, so I'm not a lawyer. Don't expect me to analyze legal documents. I leave that to my good senator and Dr. Oded, Ms. Odede. They are better equipped to look at the legality of it. But as a political, when you look at it, as I look at it as an academic, as a political economist, as somebody who can analyze the document outside the context of it all. So if you go to the basis of it and say that the reason why the BBI process was put in place was to address issues of electoral injustice, was to look at issues of the electoral integrity, and how do you make sure that you have free, fair, and credible elections. And then you look at the recommendations and really the amendments that have been made. The amendments are not focused on actually the electoral justice. When you look at the meat of it, the amendments that touch on elections and things related to that are actually very few. The majority of the amendments, and the most significant ones, are the ones that Senator Mugeni is going to be talking about. They have to do with the representation in Parliament and the Senate, but also the whole issue about creating an imperial presidency, whichever way you look at it. This is a return to the 1991, the before repeal of Article 2A of the Constitution times. And so, so when you're looking at it from that broad angle of the BBI, and you're looking at if the purpose was to look at electoral injustice and integrity of elections, then it actually, from an academic angle, it doesn't meet muster. It doesn't address the core of it, because frankly, the core of it is not that there was anything wrong with the Constitution. The core of it is not that there was anything wrong with the laws that we already have. The problem was with the whole issue is that we love impunity. We have not been, we've not been implementing the laws that exist, and I'm guilty as a member of the IEBC Commission in my role, that there are things in terms of, when you look at the Supreme Court ruling, there were things that we could have done better as a commission. We could have followed the rules and the laws better. The Supreme Court, and remember, I presided only on one election that was nullified. So I stand guilty. I stand condemned by the Supreme Court for the process that I ran, which they nullified. And I agree with it, that there are things we could have done. So, but that does not require us to then go and mutilate the Constitution. It requires us to go back and say, what were the things that the Commission should have done to really ensure that the rule of law was followed? And it goes to the basic. It is manipulation of the IEBC by the state. It is not allowing the IEBC to be independent. It is not an independent body. It could be an independent body, but it has not been allowed to be an independent body. You asked me about, and I'll speak generally, you asked about some of the recommendations around the appointment, composition, tenure, etc. of the commission. Those things have not actually even been addressed. You look at the latest version of the bill, they have been removed. They have not been addressed. Why? Because actually you do not need constitutional amendments to do that. All you need is to really truly allow the commission to be independent. And how do you allow the commission to be independent? You stop the horse trading that happens in the appointment of commissioners. I am aware that even I was, frankly speaking, I was given that position not because of my electoral expertise, which I have lots of experience in that, but because I was maybe a less threatening person because they didn't know me. I was an unknown quantity. They did not know who Rosalind Akombe was. So they preferred Rosalind Akombe, who they did not know, than having Zephania, who's a very experienced electoral expert working for USID, because they needed to do the regional balance. So I think we spend so much time trying to fix a problem that doesn't exist. The problem is not in the laws. The problem is not in the legal structure. The problem is in the state capture of institutions. The fact that the commission is not allowed to do its work. You have fantastic staff in the commission. I can assure you, I have worked in several countries across the world. We have some of the best staff in that commission. if they are allowed to do their work independently, and here I'm not talking about the commissioners, I'm talking about the staff, I'm talking about people who are career election officers who have labored and gotten to the ranks where they are. You will know, you will see the ones that were politically appointed or were political appointees within the commission. They have been given positions, data commissioner there, you know, another one is heading Huduma Kenya. You will look at those people, Huduma number, those are the people who are there to be manipulated by the state. But you will look at, if you look at the structure of the staffing themselves, the staff are there and they're working and they're very good people. The law just need to be obeyed. The commission just need to be allowed to do its work. The horse trading that politicians do must stop. Otherwise, you cannot talk about an independent commission that reports through the Attorney General's office, which is the case right now. You cannot talk about an independent commission when Treasury decides on your budget and decides on where it's going to give you the money and things related to that. So I'll stop at that, but I just wanted to give the context and say that the problem is not in the laws. The problem is not in the Katiba. The problem lies with the impunity. The problem lies with the plutocracy that we have. The problem lies with those who just want to have a system that they can manipulate and have themselves perpetuate their own leadership in power. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daktari. I think to take us deeper, we'll go back to Senator. Senator Omoge.
Are you able to hear me now?
Yes, we can
perfectly.
hear you now.
Okay,
Yeah, just
so,
picking up from where Daktari has left, what are your general observations on the BBI, and are the amendments there necessary? And specifically to you, Senator, as a member of the Senate, what are your thoughts on the proposed changes in the composition of the Senate and the National Assembly? Do we really need more representation in the National Assembly? Is the consequence of the proposed amendment going to undermine any of the two houses? Your thoughts? Thank you, Senator.
Yeah, thank you. First, on the entire BBI process, I first of all want to thank the views that have been expressed by my good constituent, Dr. Akombe, and also thank her for the service that she offered to the country as a commissioner during the last elections, and also thank her for continuing to be very patriotic by participating and engaging in a forum like this that enriches discussions around governance issues, electoral reforms, and the whole aspects of amendment of our constitution. First, the BBI process really gives this country the very, very first opportunity from the time we enacted our constitution in 2010 to really test the supremacy of the people, to be able to steer a process geared towards amending our constitution. The only difference is that the process, though it seeks the approval of the people and is people-driven, is being marketed by the government and the former Prime Minister, Raila Amolo Odinga. Now, the only thing I want to say is that the way we manage this first referendum will set precedent on how we are likely to undertake these processes in future. And I want to begin by emphasizing that making proposals to amend the Constitution by itself is not a bad thing. And I think we should encourage Kenyans to always be ready and willing to start a process that is geared towards amending their constitution. Even if we were to, borrow from other jurisdictions, I mean, there are countries like Australia, where we have heard of their constitution was enacted in 1901, and we have had over 44 proposals to amend the constitution. And I think that country has had over close to, I think, 19 referendums, or making various proposals on amending their constitution, and only 9, have gone through. So we need to make our people understand that amending our constitution should not ignite some heat, political heat in the country. It's a right that is given to us as Kenyans. It's a process that should be conducted democratically. It's a process that should give Kenyans a right to either say they accept or not. It's a process that should be geared towards making Kenya as a country more democratic and more inclusive. And I guess that's why in many countries, you need approval of a majority of citizens before any constitutional amendment can be accepted. In our own case, the BBI process will not see the light of the day till and unless at least 24 of our county assemblies have passed it. And in the vote that will take place, at least 50% of Kenyans must endorse the process. If you go to a country like Australia, out of the 6 states, at least 6 of them must approve any proposed amendment, and more than 50% of people who turn out to vote must endorse the process. So the process that I'm seeing being undertaken in this country, if you look at it broadly, it's a process that, if you look at the theory of our constitution, it can never see the light of the day till and unless the majority of Kenyans endorse the process. I want to believe that we are really going to test our county assemblies, because this being a people-driven process, the role of the National Assembly and that of the Senate from henceforth is merely passive. I mean, whether the National Assembly or the Senate rejects the process, it will still proceed to the referendum. But if we don't garner support from 24 county assemblies, then the process may not see the light of the day. What am I saying? I don't think this process should make the political heat to really go up. I don't think this process should leave us divided than we are. I don't think this process should be a life and death situation. I don't think this process should really force somebody to either believe yes or no. It's a process that should give the people of Kenya an opportunity to either endorse the proposals or not. Now, going back to the proposed changes, of course, there is a big paradigm shift on our legislative framework and the structure as enacted in 2010. I think the spirit of the 2010 Constitution was to have 3 distinct arms of government: the executive, the legislative arm, and then the judicial arm, more or less like what happens in the United States of America. I think we borrowed heavily from United States of America. Now, if you look at the proposed changes, now we are going to have the executive coming back to the National Assembly. There is now room for the head of state to pick ministers from among elected members of parliament. We are going to have a prime minister who must be an elected member of parliament. We are going to have deputy prime ministers who may not necessarily be elected members of parliament, but who will be ex officio members of parliament. We will have the Attorney General going back to being an ex officio member of the National Assembly, unlike the prevailing situation now. We're going to have deputy cabinet ministers being elected from being picked from among elected members of parliament. So basically, we will have the executive and the legislative arm occupying the floor of parliament. On the other hand, the opposition, which many have argued, and I agree with them, has felt orphaned for failure of having strong leadership in the House. They will now have a leader of official opposition occupying a seat in the National Assembly, so that he can lead the accountability card on behalf of the opposition, which I must say is a good thing. Now, on the other hand, we hope that the changes that are being proposed, amendments to Article 89, Article 90, Article 97, and 98 should fix the challenges around gender parity in the two houses. I think the biggest winner in this, of course, is our women gender, because now political parties are obligated to nominate not more than 2/3 of their candidates, not to be of one gender, meaning if you are picking 100 candidates, at least 2/3 would be of one gender, then 1/3 is reserved for the other gender, meaning that we are really opening the political space to women participation, which has been lacking. I think for me it's a good thing. And then of course there's a radical paradigm shift on how we would be topping up the gender seats in the National Assembly. Previously, we have tried with the idea of having nomination slots where the party bosses pick the people they so wish. But I think now Parliament will be occupied by politicians, because even the top-up that is being proposed will be based on the votes that a party garners in a political contest after an election, and those who have participated in elections and who have garnered the highest number of votes will be given a priority. Of course, the very most contentious issue is that we are at least going to have an enlarged Parliament. The National Assembly is being enlarged. We are going to have 360, at least 360 elected members of Parliament. And depending on how the Kenyans will pick or elect their members of Parliament, there's a likelihood that these numbers would go up so that we deal with the issue of gender. Of course, the people with disability have been taken care of. We'll have 4 people with disabilities, and of course, 2 youths will be given nomination slots to the National Assembly. If you were to ask me, that's a fairly inclusive Parliament, maybe the very first one since independence. The huge number is debatable whether our economy is able to sustain. I'm one of those who also entertained doubts, had a different view about this personally, but as they say, you can always have your say, but not your way. I think the majority of the view, at least this far, the drafters and those pushing the BBI, are of the view that it's a price worth paying so that women are also given room to participate in our politics. Finally, I think in the Senate, the issue of gender will not be an issue going forward because we will have one man, one woman. My committee, I chair the Committee of Justice, Legal Affairs and Human Rights, was not agreeable to this position. We felt that it would be tidy if you have one senator who is a delegate from a county, just the way it is currently, but that was not taken on board. So we'll have 2 women elected from each county to give us a total of 94 senators. Again, in terms of population, there are those who have the view that our economy, our population does not justify these big numbers in our Parliament, taking into account that it's fairly costly and expensive to, sustain members of Parliament. But that's where we are now. If I was to conclude, I would say that looking at the way the composition of parliament is now captured in BBI, the vulnerable groups, that is women, people with disabilities, and the youths have been taken care of. So I'm looking forward to a process that is fairly inclusive if the proposed changes will find favor with the members of county assemblies, at least 24 county assemblies, and if Kenyans will be able to endorse this process through the referendum. Finally on this, I think BBI is a process that gives an opportunity to the Kenyan people to finally decide whether they accept the proposed changes or not. Once we are done with preparing the referendum law, which is currently pending before the National Assembly, we'll be able to know the proper legislative framework that will guide the referendum process and how we conduct the process. Akombe will tell you that in several states, I remember I was in the states when I was the president of Law Society of Kenya in 2008. And I remember during the elections, as you tick your preferred candidate, you also find several states put in referendum questions for you to accept. In fact, I remember there is a state, I think it must have been Georgia, where even judges were being picked. You know, you are being asked, do you accept the continuing in office of this particular judge, yes or no, and several other things. So let's have a culture where going forward, we allow Kenyans at any time to suggest changes to our constitution through a popular initiative without it being turned into a political contest. Thank you.
And thank you. Yeah, indeed, this is a Kenyan process, and why we are having this series to just give you an opportunity to engage with the issues, to hear what the issues really are, so that you can make informed choices. I think it's a responsibility of us as Kenyans.
You're on and off the mic. Eh?
Sorry about that. I think I'm back on. Yeah, so as I was saying, Kenyans, let's take the opportunity to engage with the process. It is our country, it is our process, it is our constitution. And we hope through this series that we will be able to inform you better, that we will provide information about the issues really that the BBI is talking about. And before we proceed to the next panelist, I'd like to encourage you participants to pose your questions in the chat session, and to also engage us on our various social media platforms at ICJ Kenya. You can pose your questions so that you can probe the panelists further. Thank you.
Great, Jane. Thank you, Senator Omogeni, for really giving us that really in-depth oversight of what your thoughts are in terms of the BBI report, and you know your general feeling that the BBI report should not divide people, but rather should bring people together so that we can query some of these things and pick them out for discussion at the national level. You have mentioned a lot of things that I'm sure, for example, Dr. Kombe would like to respond to. We'll give you an opportunity to speak to them, as well as some of the gender issues in the Senate. So Rosaline Odede will come in later on, but before that, to Dr. Odote. In 2017 in 2017, civil society organizations went to court through petition number 17 of 2017 and presidential petition number 4 of 2017 to try and say, okay, IEBC is not well prepared for them to conduct a fresh election. Let's go back and start again. And one of the major bases upon which these two petitions were based on is the concept of universal suffrage and the issue of inclusivity in elections. Dr. Odote, what are your thoughts in terms of the proposals in the BBI report, and what can you tell us on whether the BBI seeks to strengthen this doctrine of universal suffrage, and will it really enhance inclusivity in elections?
Thank you very much, Kimanzi. It's nice to have the forum and to speak after Rosen Akombe and Senator Mogeni. I want to, before answering your question, pick up from where Senator has left. Senator has made the point that amending the constitution through popular initiative is something that should divide us as a country. I agree fully with Senator on that sentiment. And that's why I think sometimes the conversation that, the process of amending the constitution is constitutional, I think misses the point. I think as Kenyans, we need to be able to accept where the mistakes are, but also where the realities are. I think the reality is that the conversation about amending this constitution is not a conversation that started in 2018 with the handshake. It's a conversation that has been with us since 2010 when we adopted the new constitution. I think as the new constitution was being adopted, there was conversation that 20% of this constitution is bad. That's number two. I think the opposition after 2013, through their core initiative, started making conversation about things they wanted change in the constitution. Didn't succeed. Number three, I think the Third Way Alliance started a popular initiative about Mizigo, again underscoring the fact that there are some things that may be required to be looked at the constitution. So I think for me, I think the conversation about whether we need to make some changes of the constitution may not even be the bigger problem. I think that's something that our constitution envisages, and there's been conversations in certain quarters in Kenya that it needs to be changed in certain areas. I think, for example, on the two-thirds gender principle, that I take personal position that we could never implement unless we amended the constitution. But that's our contribution. I think, speaking for that purpose, I think if you go back to where we were in 2017 as a country, the reality is that we were in a situation where there's a lot of division, there was a lot of tension. So a process that enables us to address those kind of things, for me, I think is useful. My bigger problem is not that. The bigger problem is I think the BBI process has morphed into a process only of changing the constitution. So BBI now has become a conversation only about do we change or not change, not about some of the things that Roslyn spoke about, not about how much do we address the 9-point agenda. The 9-point agenda have been changed into only constitutional change. Yes, there are some things that require constitutional change, but there are larger issues that require implementation of the constitution, and we have been able to ask ourselves, why have we not implemented it? The second issue, I think, is where Senator left. I think the BBI process has now morphed into a conversation around the 2022 elections and the succession of President Uhuru Kenyatta. Unfortunately, it is not possible to have an objective conversation around that context. From both sides of the divide, those who now support the BBI, those who oppose it. The eyes of everybody is now the eye about, will this give political mileage or will this take away political mileage away from us? I think that's something that as a country, we need to step back and ask ourselves, why did we reach this situation? Telling of mine yesterday, when we were having the conversation, they were saying, I think BBI will divide us. And I told him, I don't think it will, because it will not make life easier or it will not make life better or worse. We were divided anyway in 2017. I think this process will again still divide us. So because we haven't addressed the fundamental issue that if you look at the proposals, I think a lot of the proposals, in my view, and unlike Roslyn, I don't think the proposals are contentious. A lot of the proposals actually, some address legitimate issues. I think the larger is the underlying philosophy of the changes process that is going on. Because BBI has morphed into a process of the 2022 succession, ordinary citizens sometimes wonders at what do they engage. Comment on all versions of the BBI proposal. I think BBI 1, BBI 2, and now BBI 3. I even asked somebody asking, does somebody now hope you BBI 3? If you take, for example, IBC that Roslyn spoke about, BBI 1 made the proposal that we require the chair of IBC to be strict, to be the overall person in charge of elections. We don't have a CEO and a chair that centers of power. One side of the political divide will manipulate, the second side will manipulate the CEO. Let's have one chair, a chair who is also the CEO. That was BBI 1. Personally, I think it made some levels of sense. When we came to BBI 2, we then said we will have commissioners being nominated by political parties, and they will serve for one term for 4 years. before guys had contestation for that. Now in BBI 3, we are silent around it. So you don't know what will be the position around IEBC. I raised that to just show that I think lack of philosophical clarity on what changes are being made in the BBI process sometimes very difficult for a citizen to then engage with the process. Let me questions, Kimanzi, on will BBI enhance universal suffrage and then enhance inclusivity? I think go to universal suffrage. I think the question about ensuring that every adult citizen has equal opportunity to vote and that their vote counts. And I think there are several changes that have been made in the BBI that have implications on that. I think Senator Mogeni has spoken about some of them. Let me start with the first one. The first one about the move away from a first past the electoral system purely to enhancing our mixed member proportional representation. The 2010 constitution, by talking about party list, already spoke about MMP, which I think was useful. But from a design perspective, a mistake by saying that, you know, for us to correct the errors of first past the post, we will ensure that people will get additional seats based on the number of seats garnered, not votes won. What that then meant is that, like the Bible, the more you had, the more that was being added. And it was, for me, encouraging the lack of equality of the vote. I think by making the change that the additional seats will be based on votes and not seats won, I think that's a progressive vision that must be supported because it helps to correct the imbalances of the first past the post electoral system. What I do not understand is why we have these 70 new constituents. I think Senator alluded to them a little bit. I don't see what problem they are solving, except for the debate that Senate and group had the Senate when they were dividing revenue about one man, one vote, or 1 kilometer, or one vote. Kenyans, when we adopted 290 constituencies, I think there was always the acceptance that 290 constituencies were sufficient. What remained was to ensure that as part of determining which constituencies they are, in terms of the boundaries, in terms of the sizes, we were going to ensure equality of the population. And that's what Article 89 addressed, given to IEBC in delimitation. We saved some constituencies in the first review and said in the second, during this time, we'll actually address that imbalance. BBI 3 now says, number one, let's save those constituencies again. It is not clear for me, are we saving them into perpetuity? But once it says, let's add ourselves 70 new constituencies without any of those 70 new constituencies are being added. When I commented on BBI 2, my understanding was that those 70 were supposed to be part of our process of achieving the 2/3 gender principle. That's what original idea thinking. Now I see it is just adding 70 new constituencies. Then we then say that of those, we give a list where they will come from 28 counties. Guys in my county, Homa Bay, have been asking, so why does Homa Bay not have a new constituency? I have no answer for them because I don't even know why Nairobi has 12. Because there's no rationale provided. It's not in the report. We just have 70 new constituents. I think that 70, I don't think it will solve our problems of universal. It will actually increase the conversations about is this going to ensure that there's equality or not. Secondly, IEBC is supposed to be delimiting constituencies now over the next between 8 to 12 years. What does delimitation power mean now? Will they it after what has happened now or not? And if they do, will they change the other protected constituencies? That's unclear in the documentation. And because of the lack of robustness in the changes being made, I think the issue about quality of the vote that you asked, Kimanzi, we have some things which are progressive, but we have other things that are retrogressive. The third thing concerning that is the issue about 2/3 that I think Roslyn will speak about. I think the inclusion of Article 177 into the National Assembly is useful because now we'll be able to achieve 2/3 in the National Assembly. I think we'll be able to achieve 2/3 in the Senate. That, in my view, is useful. But we now have a sunset clause, a sunset clause of 3 terms in the National Assembly and 2 terms in the county. It is not clear. It is not clear in the conversation. Why are there different sunset clauses? Why is there a sunset clause of only 10 years in the county assembly and 15 years in the National Assembly. No conversation either in the report, conversation in the public process. So the rest of us are left to guess as to why affirmative action is for 15 years in the National Assembly and for 10 years in the county assembly. I would have thought that if you wanted to create better times, you'd provide county assembly much more period than the county assembly, but I'm wrong. The second thing, my last issue is on affirmative action, on inclusivity. I think on inclusivity, I have 2 points. First, we look at the affirmative action groups. I think the fact that there's now an effort to realize that I think is useful for affirmative action processes concerning youth and persons with disability. Senator Mogeni says it's now useful for persons with disability. I don't think persons with disability have gained. The seats that they have in the Senate have been taken to the National Assembly. That for the National Assembly, they now have 4 persons with disability, have 2 youth, they have nothing. Both for you, they had it. I don't understand what was the rationale of now removing them from Senate and taking the National Assembly. It's giving the left and taking the right without rationale. So there may be a rationale, but that rationale is not publicly provided, leaving the rest. I think my last, in terms of inclusivity, where I agree with Senator Mogeni, I think on the executive, the reality is that we've had an ethnic competition, and to the extent that now the leader of opposition is now part of the, it's now constitutionalized to get funding for be able to have shadow cabinet, to be able to run an office, I think is a useful thing. So it ensures that politics stops at zero-sum game. It's the same reason that I think the expansion of the executive, viewed from a perspective of trying to temper our ethnic competition, is a useful thing. I think at the end of the day, they are positive, but they are negative. But the biggest challenge is the lack of clarity in the process has made this conversation less about a change of the constitution and more about 2022 and politics. So while Senator Mogeni says the changing of the constitution should never be divide us, the reality that we've turned this process away from changing the constitution to political contestation for 2022, which by its very nature divided in 2017. This process was supposed to help provide that. I don't think it is helping. I think it is continuing the political contestation and continuing the division, which is unfortunate. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Odote, for those very interesting views and for your honest opinions on this. You have mentioned very, very critical issues, saying that the BBI report really has very good. There are proposals that are really good, and there are proposals that should be relooked at, and the fact that there's lack of conversation on some of the thematic areas within the discussions that are there in the public. I think you've mentioned also some of the things that you've quoted some of the things and mentioned some of the things that previous speakers, Dr. Kombe, Senator Mogeni has mentioned, and perhaps maybe after this we will have to give each one of you just 1 minute to give a quick response to that. But before that, I'll allow my colleague to take us through the next speaker, that is Dr. Odede.
Thank you very much, Silas. I think we now move to the issue, the 2/3 gender role, and the challenges we've had with implementation up to where now we are, where there has been a recommendation for the dissolution of parliament because of the failure to take the necessary steps to ensure that rule is realized. So I think the question which has been touched on by Dr. Odote and Senator Mogeni, to them, it seems like we are not losing anything in terms of women representation. And now I pose to you, Ms. Odede, do you agree with them? Do you think that the proposals within the BBI will finally resolve this issue of the 2/3 gender representation? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Jane, for giving me this opportunity to speak. It's normally hard to speak last after everybody has spoken and mentioned everything. But I'll try my best to just bridge the gaps of what is left so far. You're asking whether the proposals actually address the 2/3 gender issue. Now, let me start by saying that Article 27.3, which provides for the two-thirds gender principle, still exists as a constitutional doctrine and principle in our constitution. There's been no attempt to amend it. So it still remains a requirement that needs to be achieved, not only in the National Assembly, but throughout all other appointed and elected positions in the country. So that is one thing we need to consider. So we ask ourselves questions like, will the two-thirds gender principle be met in cabinet? Will the two-thirds gender principle be met across all other appointive bodies? Because we see even as of today, it's not only the National Assembly that fails to achieve the two-thirds gender principle, but even cabinet has fallen short, the Supreme Court has fallen short. So all arms of government are lagging behind even as of now. So that's something we need to think about and consider even as we go forward. Even as we were asking for the dissolution of parliament, we were not asking for the dissolution of parliament because parliament in itself had not achieved the two-thirds principle. We were asking for its dissolution because they had failed to enact a law that would have enabled the application of the two-thirds gender principle. So we need to distinguish those two and ensure that that's what we are discussing in our minds. So to move forward, I would say, well, in the proposed amendments, there's a lot of gains, and there is some areas where we'll say we are still losing out. Now, the proposals actually provide for nominations of such number of special seat members to ensure gender balance. Of course, this then will enable us achieve the two-thirds gender principle as provided in the Constitution. But will it achieve Article 54.3 provisions where PWDs are supposed to be at least 5%? We are seeing no provisions in these amendments for achieving Article 54, which relates to PWDs, and that's a great concern. There's no clear principle on how to bring in more youth into the assembly and into representation. Again, that's a concern. We are talking of expanding the executive, but this executive has no clauses on inclusivity or diversity. Again, that is a concern. So we are seeing, yes, there are gains, but we still haven't achieved all the gains we would like to see. Now, the removal of the 47 county women reps or the MPs from the National Assembly is for me a loss as well, because it is better to be elected than to be nominated. If you're elected, you get one, the experience of campaigning and participating in an election, you get more respectability, you have more legitimacy. When you're nominated, we know all the conversations that go around people who are nominated. They're labeled all sorts of names. And in certain assemblies, like in Kisii, they are not even allowed to chair committees or not even allowed to address the assembly because they are ridiculed just because they are nominated. So nomination is not the way out. We need to find ways of allowing women to participate in elections by right, as of right, and to get elected. The 47 women rep seats were very powerful and very useful for training women to participate even in the bigger elections and also to find a footing into politics. So the removal of those seats is actually a loss in terms of allowing women to be validly elected as women into parliament. And I do not see why we wouldn't have retained those seats instead of expanding the assembly by 70 more constituencies. The issue of expanding the number of constituencies is very controversial because that is a mandate that is right now constitutionally reserved for the IEBC. Do the drafters of this bill have the power to direct IEBC on how and where to situate constituencies? Are they usurping the power of the IEBC? And as Dr. Dote validly asks, do we need the 70 more seats? Do they address the 9 issues we set out to address? I may say not. And we should have actually retained the 47 women seats instead of expanding the constituencies, and actually retained the current structure of the National Assembly and then provided for nominations to fill up the gender gap. I think that one would have had a lean structure, a much more controlled structure, and had more respectability for women getting elected into the National Assembly. So I find that a concern. The sunset clause is not quite a concern because this is an affirmative action policy. So the 3 elections hence and then the sunset clause is not much of a concern for me. At least we'll have a provision where women will have opportunities of engaging in representation at a national level and thereafter participating by right into those elections. When we talk of Senate, it's a win, but again, yes, we get to have gender parity. Now, not just a 2/3 representation, but gender parity, equality of men and women in that assembly. But again, I'll speak for the Article 54 rights, which are not considered here. And we used to have nominations for people with disabilities, for youth into Senate, and it's a way of actually just bringing them in to train them. Are we sure that our political parties are actually going to field candidates in positions where they are likely to be elected as PWDs into the Senate? Or are they going to, what are we going to do to ensure that we have inclusivity and diversity in the Senate? Because as it is structured, it is left to the competitive provisions. It's left to the election and the electorate to determine who gets in there. Are we sure that the candidates list are going to fill a PWD in a county where a party is very strong and likely to win? Or are they just going to fill these people in marginalized counties where they're unlikely to get elected? It is now dependent on political parties to ensure that they give life to Article 54 and Article 81 and ensure that we have more women elected. And I think this is where we can speak back to the proposals around the statutes in the BBI document, the steering committee report, where they talk of funding to political parties being dependent on the number of special interest group members who are directly elected by the party, so that will determine the strength and the amount of money you get. This might just encourage political parties to promote special interest groups in terms of elections, but the proposals put in there will not achieve it for all special interest groups into either house of representation, be it Senate or the National Assembly. It is also proposed that the 30% of the funds received by a party should be for promoting these people. So I think we need to do a lot more civic education at political party level if we are going to achieve full and attendant rights as provided in the Constitution. So yes, there are lots of gains in there for gender in terms of we'll now get the 2/3 gender balance in the assembly, but there are losses in there as well. It's progressive to ask the governor to consider having a running mate of the opposite gender, although I wish that we had used stronger terms. But I'm told had we used stronger terms, even the consideration wouldn't have been there. So this is a stepping stone to in future requiring as of right that the governor has a running mate of opposite gender. So if the candidate for governor is a woman, the running mate has got to be a man and vice versa. And we would also like to see this translated to other positions like for president and for prime minister, because that's the actual spirit of Article 27. So I do not see why it should be protected at certain positions and only applied in certain positions. So those are things, again, we are still anchoring for and hoping to see the light of day about the future. The Youth Commission is a progressive inclusion in the draft amendment bill, the Constitution draft amendment bill, because it now elevates the issues of mainstreaming youth issues at the national level, and it gives them a commission and a voice and a fund to discuss these issues. So I think that will be progressive in terms of elevating youth issues, and maybe through that commission, they can fight for more space in future referendums for the youth within representation. So Jane, that's what I could say about representation and gender as of now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Odede. And I think before we go to the Q&A and give the panelists an opportunity to respond, maybe just a follow-up with you, Roslyn, and all the other panelists. Do you think, since we are seeing the switching or the reallocation of seats in either the National Assembly or the Senate, would you say there is a real or implied superiority of either of the two houses? And might that be the rationale for the switch, so that you want to give women more representation in the Senate and not in the National Assembly? Yeah, I think that's a question we can address, as we also address other questions that have come in through our various platforms. Somebody asked, in a country that has had an unfortunate history of divisive elections on tribal lines, has the BBI and the Constitutional Amendment Bill solved issues ethnic or tribal politics?
Yeah, we also have another question from Robert Natwoli. I have read the BBI, and handshake led to the constitutional review, which I think is illegal and unconstitutional. What do you say? So maybe we can give just a minute to one of each of you, the panelists, so that you can give your quick comments regarding each other's presentation as we move into the next session, where we will have 2 comments from Luciana Thuo and one more participant, then we can move into the full Q&A question. I'll start with you, Senator Senior Counsel Omogeni. Just a minute to quickly give your feedback.
Good. A minute, even judges will never give you a minute to respond to your submissions, but let me see how I can do justice to myself within a minute. I think there is a very critical issue that Dr. Odote has raised. He says that BBI has very, very good proposals, but he also adds that there are some that needs to be relooked at. And I think this is why I blame the drafters of the 2010 Constitution, because they make a popular constitutional amendment initiative through the people, something that is cast in stone. You either take it or not. So even as we move forward, I know that Dr. Odote is justified in saying that there are clauses that need to be looked at, but the way the Constitution is, framed, we may not have a window to propose any changes. And I think going forward in future, that is something that this country needs to think about. Grace Odede, I think, has also raised a very critical issue on representation and the creation of new constituencies vis-a-vis the role of IBC in drawing constituency boundaries. You know, we reduced, I think, what is in the second BBI is an attempt to ensure that each county feels that it gets a piece of the cake, and basically that ties the hands of IBC. And I think that looked together with the fact that the 290 constituencies are not specifically named in the Constitution, whereas the new proposed 70 have been identified as constituencies belonging to particular counties, is an issue that may be problematic going forward. And I think the issues that have been raised by Odote and by Roslyn Odede, my good friend, who was my very able council member when I was the president of Law Society of Kenya, brings to the fore the fact that this being the very first attempt to amend our constitution, our courts of law may also help us in giving an interpretation that makes clarification on some of the areas where there is no clarity. So I think by and large, going forward, there are very good proposals on BBI, but there are some where Kenyans feel that if they had been given a choice, they would have looked at them, including the contention being raised by Roslyn Odede as to whether there is wisdom in removing the 47 elected women county reps from the National Assembly to the Senate. Our report of on this BBI, the first BBI, on my Committee of Justice, Legal Affairs and Human Rights, had actually recommended that we retain the 47 women reps because they have a fund that enables them to reach out to vulnerable women and young girls. And therefore, when you remove them from the National Assembly and take them to the Senate, where there is no kitty, it's really a loss, the way Roslyn Odede has rightly observed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator, for those quick questions. I mean, for that quick reaction. We have more questions from social media. Brian Okoth asking, what is the effect of the amendment of Article 177 B and C in devolution and governance? I think these are questions that panelists can answer as they give their final responses after the Q&A, as you answer the Q&A. To you, Dr. Akombe, you were on the ground in before. You were an IBC commissioner. Dr. Odote, Mr. Odede, and Senator Omogeni has mentioned about issues of inclusivity, and they have given different views regarding these thematic areas. What are your thoughts, and what is your quick reaction to their presentation?
Thank you very much. I think those are very good presentations, really from Dr. Odote and from Ms. Odede, especially on inclusivity and really how you accommodate that. But I want to go a bit, if you allow me, to what Senator Okongo said about making, changes to the constitution something that is normal. And that is actually what you would expect in any democracy. That in any democracy, you would have a process in which citizens debate and discuss on issues that they see that they need to have changes on, and they will put them to vote. And we do that all the time. And the senator alluded to observing elections in the US. We do that all the time. In my state, in this election that we just had, which I presided over in a small way, we were voting on whether we were going to have allow for marijuana to be legalized or not. But that's a debate that you have all year round. Like, it's a discussion we've been having for a long time. It's not something that people, a few people decided and put up forward, but it's been a discussion for a long time. There has been civic engagement. There have been town halls for many, many months that have been held, where explanations have been provided to people, those who are proposing the amendments, make their case. Those who are against it make their case, and then citizens respond to it. And in the ballot, at the back of it, there are explanations. It explains. So you have a whole page explaining what it means if you vote yes, and explaining what it means if you vote no. But those are only like 2 amendments you are seeing for me as a voter to look at when I am voting. Here, we're presented with a series, as you've heard from everybody that has spoken, of changes everywhere. And you're expecting people to say yes or no to the whole gamut of changes without the possibility of them being able to pick the ones they like or not. What would have been so difficult in facing some of these changes if they were really having conversations and saying, okay, we need to change. And there is one part of, for instance, when I was a commissioner, one part of it that we really advocated for, the parts about changing the provisions in Article 89(4), and really changing, changing that 88(4), and allowing, removing the issue of arbitration dispute resolution from the IEBC and having somebody else do it, which in this proposal is now with the PPDT. But you're now putting all this together, and you're making me in a situation whereby I have to pick yes or no. And I'm going to vote no because I'm voting no to everything else that is there, and not being given the chance to be able to just say vote yes for this particular one that I, as a former commissioner, know that is important to have. but you've put everything together and making people, making it really difficult for people to make those choices on what is right and what they accept or not. So just saying, Senator Mugeni, if we are going to talk about democracy and expanding democracy and expanding the citizens' rights to choose, then let's not use a political process that we are using to achieve a political deal to make significant changes, which we could have given a chance to people to look at and review and choose which works, what works or not for them. And again, it goes to the question when we keep talking about when you change and now allow and say that the boundaries are being set up, especially on the boundary demarcation that we see in those proposals. What is the role then of the IBC? Why are we still calling it the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission? It has a mandate for looking at boundaries. And what I saw actually in terms of inclusivity, one of the things that I liked were the formulas that were being established to allow us to make sure that when we were looking at the top-ups, especially at the MCA level, ensuring that we had women, we had persons with disability, we had youth, we had minorities. And one would have thought that those are some of the things you look at the experience of the commission and how the commission handled that, and maybe replicate that, use that formula for purposes of achieving the same inclusivity at the level of senator and the level of the members of parliament. There are questions that have been asked about whether these proposals and the BBI will lead to the end of political violence and things like that. But I take it that we will be answering that later on, so I'll not go into that. But I think we have very strong points that we need to make around that. Thank you.
Much, Dr. Akombe. And before Dr. Odote goes, I think I would like to pose a specific question to you that you can maybe expound on as you give your feedback on the issue of Article 177. I think it's a very confusing issue for most people about what is it with this proposal to change from party list being based on political parties and the number of seats they have won to the number of votes garnered. I think that is something, Dr. you can expound on.
Is that for me or was that for me?
Yeah, that's for you, Dr. as you give your feedback on the other presentation.
You're saying that before I go on, Dr. Akombe, and then say Dr. I assume Dr. Rosalind Akombe, so quiet. I think the conversation about seats to won versus votes garnered from an election system design is about, if you ask Rosalind, as they were determining which political we give it the top up, even the county assemblies, is on what basis do you do the calculations? Currently, IBC does the calculations based on the number of seats won. So let's take, for example, Homa Bay, where I come from, and let's assume that there are 30 wards. So when you then have to do the top up, the question will be, how many seats did Collins' party win? Let's assume 20. How many seats did Rosalind's party win? Rosalind Odede, let's say 5. And then Rosalind Akombe 5. So if you're then calculating how many extra seats, then the person who has 20 seats will get more positions. The only thing is that it then fast past the post, because whoever was number one, even if they won by only one vote, they will get an additional allocation. The current says based on the number of votes garnered, it therefore you be compensated for your number twos, be compensated for the votes that you garnered, which did not translate into seats. I think it therefore means that yes, number one will still get seats. Number of seats number one get will not enhance the divide, will not enhance the difference. It likely reduce the difference. We're almost trying to equalize the vote. It means that every vote will, so to speak, count. That's it. Because even those who are one, those votes will be translated into seats. That's the idea behind the change in Article 1. And it's not just a change in Article 177. It's also a change in terms of how the additional seats that are being created, that are being proposed to the National Assembly will be catered for. So that's the thing that I would like to speak about. Allow me to also respond to something that Father Dolan has raised, which I think is important. Father Dolan raises the question, it possible to fix IBC before a referendum or 2022 general election? If not possible, what are the likely consequences? In a view, Father Dolan, this is my greatest disappointment with the process. In 2017, when the two Roslins went before the selection panel, I went before the selection panel for different reasons. I was training the selection panel on how to conduct the nominations. And I told them, you know, the people who are coming here are set up for failure. It does not matter who of them comes in after Ahmed Isaac. In 2017, we will be accusing them of having rigged the elections. I didn't know that Roslyn would drive to the US because by then she had not been chosen. I think we are going to have the same problem in 2022 because we've not been candid for ourselves about what is the nature of our problems with the IBC. And I think Roslyn started alluding to it. The nature with our problems with the IBC is that politicians want to manipulate the election commission. And the colleagues of Roslyn agreed to be manipulated. People who were there agreed to, because the system is such that you are either manipulated or you are in trouble. Damned if you do or damned if you don't. Unfortunately, I don't think these conversations have scattered around the reality of our IBC challenge and real solutions to it. Until we do that, our elections will continue being contested because we'll have a situation where politicians will want to manipulate who becomes commissioner. So Roslyn will go there because she is not known, because she is less harmful. Those who are more known, those who are known to be objective, will definitely be number last in that process because they will want people who are weak, people who are valuable. Once they go in, once we start the process of manipulating them, the end result is that we'll have an election outcome which is contested and which will lead to violence. Much.
Okay, I think we lost Daktari. Okay. Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Odote. I didn't quite catch you at the end. I think before we proceed to some people who'd like to call in live, I can just read a few comments that resonate with what you're saying. Walter Mashwara comments and says, why is it that BBI has opened our eyes of the challenges we have as a country? We've had, having, and will have constitutional contamination that needs vaccination for prosperity. Challenge is when we have a song created out of frustration from leadership and politics of deceit, misinformation, and we all join without interrogating the wording, the meaning. We've had challenges with the 2/3 gender rule, but we have been quiet. Can we as a country employ a sober conversation on how we can move our country forward? Yeah, I think that resonates with most people as we ask, is there room to have a sober conversation that is really geared towards the interests of all of us as Kenyans, and not really a process that seems to only capture the interest of certain people? I think we now give the opportunity to Luciana Thuo. Are you there, Luciana?
I am. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, you can pose your question or your comment.
Thank you so much, Luciana, for finding time to join us today as an off-the-panel commentator. You have really worked on the issue of around the issue of elections. You have looked at the petitions that are there in 2013 general election, and as well as the 2017 general elections. We worked with you to come up with a compendium, and I'm sure this is a conversation that really touches your heart. We have several questions that have been asked by participants that have resonated with some of us who have spoken. Francis Uaya asking, the main issue of the BBI is whether we should answer yes or no question. Can people give alternatives like multiple choice questions? That's a question that really resonates with what Dr. Kombe said. We also have another question from Benson Ambuko. One of the electoral reforms that Dr. Kombe was fronting as an IBC commissioner is the staggering of the 6 elections so that the IBC conducts national and county elections on different days. 6 elections in a day fatigues both the electoral staff and the voter. Can this be done, and is it a proposal in the BBI constitutional amendment bill That's a question that Benson Amuko is asking. But before we go into the main Q&A session, Luciana, you really have worked around this election issue. And I'm sure you have a comment. You heard what the panelists have spoken and their views. What do you have to share with us today? Over to you, Luciana.
Thank you, Silas, and thank you to all the able panelists who've gone before me. All of them are my seniors, and I'm honored to be part of this discussion with you. I'd like to echo what has been said by all of them, starting with the question of how the narrative around the BBI has morphed from a national dialogue and moved towards questions of the 2022 elections and what that is keeping us from doing. One of the things that Dr. Odote has asked is, why are we not talking about what we have not implemented in the Constitution? And that's one of the things I'd like to point out. There is a proposal in article around amending Article 82 of the Constitution, for example, to create sanctions for political parties which have not complied with the 2/3 gender rule. There is already judicial decisions, two decisions from 2016, the case of Moses Mishigi versus the IBC. There is already a 2017 decision, Katiba Institute versus the IBC, around the role of the IBC in regulating political party nomination processes and ensuring that those nomination processes are gender inclusive. We have not yet implemented those decisions. So some of the proposals around creating sanctions for the 2/3 gender rule, like the proposal to amend Article 82, are then rendered redundant in light of those judicial decisions. And I would be very keen to hear dialogue around what are we doing with the tools that we already have. My senior Ms. Odede has talked about the question of sanctions for political parties, around the question of the 30% of the funding given to political parties to secure inclusion. There is power given to the registrar under Section 25. Of the Political Parties Act. If any political party is not complying with the mandate of the 2/3 gender rule, they should not receive funds from the political parties fund. Under Section 26, if any political party is not using 30% of its fund towards securing the inclusion of marginalized groups, they should not receive any funds from the political party registrar. How are we using those provisions to secure inclusion? I think a broader discussion on inclusion must move towards also how do we use what we already have, which is where I'd like to start the discussion. But also around the question of the proposed changes to the National Assembly and the Senate. Very valid questions are raised around, are women gaining? My senior Dr. Mogeni has said women have gained. I beg to differ. I think women are losing. My senior Ms. Odede has talked about the idea around women who are nominated, whether to the National Assembly or Senate, being considered second-tier representatives. And the statistics are from the 2017 elections confirm this narrative. If you look at the number of women who were elected directly to county assemblies, for example, you will find that at least 12 county assemblies did not have any women directly elected to the county assembly. Why was that? Because we have the gender top-up formula to fill in those seats. So you create this narrative that women are not good for direct election, they're only good for nomination, which then leads to a diminution of the participation role that is supposed to be given to women in the Constitution. So do I think an increase in the number of nominations for women is a plus? No, I think we should strengthen, as my senior Ms. Odede has said, the capacity of women to be directly elected to these seats. If you also look at the transition from deputy governors to governors from the last elections, you will see that very few women governors made the transition from being deputy governors to being elected governors because they had no experience mounting an election campaign and being elected. It is very important that we retain the seat where women can be directly elected to give women the experience, as my senior has said, but also to counter this narrative that women should be nominated as opposed to being elected. I am also concerned with the amendments to Articles 96, 97, and 98 when it comes to the inclusion of other groups. I believe the narrative around gender parity has had the side effect of marginalizing people with disabilities, marginalizing youth, and marginalizing members of marginalized communities who are supposed to be provided for under Article 100 and for whom we see no mention in the proposals to amend Articles 97 and 98. It results in this zero-sum game where there is a contest between marginalized groups as to whose rights should be prioritized over others, something which has been called in the equality debate the oppression Olympics. It is not beneficial to the question of inclusion to promote the rights of one group while diminishing the rights of other groups. Even if you look at it from a democracy perspective, my senior Dr. Doty has talked about proportional representation countering majoritarianism that arises from the first past the post elections. In the current constitution, we had 12 seats in the National Assembly against 290 elected positions. We are now moving to a situation where we will have only 6 nominated slots in a parliament of 360 plus elected or members of the National Assembly. If the aim of proportional representation is to counter majoritarianism, then that is lost in the current proposal. And that is why I believe other groups are losing, even as we are championing the inclusion of women, and that cannot be said to be a plus for the wider inclusion debate. There is a strange proposal that I'm also seeing in Article 177, which purports to give political parties which have nominated members to the county assembly the power to recall them. I express concern about that proposal for 2 reasons. Number one, there is already judicial decision around the fact that if a person has been sworn into either parliament or the county assembly, the only way to remove them is through an election petition. The High Court settled that in 2013. So to give political parties the power to remove a nominated member at will, as is proposed by the draft, appears to counter the decision that has already been given by the High Court on that issue. But secondly, I think in light of the recent history we have had of parliamentarization of party politics, there is a danger in having party disputes playing out in parliament or in the county assemblies to the detriment of nominated members, who are people who would ordinarily not be elected to those slots anyway. So I do feel there is some concern around the proposed amendment to Article 177 to give political parties the power to recall their nominated members to parliament. Finally, I think a discussion on inclusion would be incomplete without looking at what dispute resolution mechanisms are available for people who are excluded from the nomination process, which is something that has existed primarily in the IEBC under Article 88.4E, but which is now proposed to be amended so that the power to resolve nomination disputes is now entirely given to the political parties disputes tribunal. I second the proposal to amend the dispute resolution function of the IEBC. Because the IEBC primarily manages elections, dispute resolution becomes very ancillary. That dispute resolution process is rarely ever done well. It's done in a very summary manner. But if you also think about the number of disputes that arise from the pre-election procedures, the party list process and the nomination process, 2017, the Political Parties Disputes Tribunal had about 350 party list disputes, had 234 nomination disputes. IEBC had 350. If you're going to transfer these to the Political Parties Disputes Tribunal, and the majority of those who bring these disputes are women, are members of marginalized communities, are youths, then you must capacitate the Political Parties Disputes Tribunal better than it is currently constituted. At the moment, you only have 7 members. The proposal to increase that to 15 in 2017 was shot down. That tribunal currently only sits in Nairobi. If you're talking about people from marginalized communities accessing justice, then questions of accessibility arise around that mechanism. But even more importantly, that mechanism has also had credibility issues from the 2017 elections. There were concerns about the partisan nature of the members, concerns about whether they were truly independent in the resolving of those disputes arising from those processes. So if the bulk of the disputes are around nomination and the exclusion, particularly of marginalized groups, then the proposal to create a dispute resolution mechanism must be one that moves towards a more effective process than what we have with the IEBC. And therefore, subsequent amendments to the Political Parties Act must also be looked at. In conclusion, I agree with my seniors when they say it is important to have dialogue around the issues that arise from the BBI process, many of which have now been sidetracked by the Constitutional Amendment Bill. I look forward to continued discussion around how we can strengthen the mechanisms that we have, but also strengthening the enforcement mechanisms within the Political Parties Act to secure the gains that we have already made for the inclusion of women, persons with disabilities, youth, and members of marginalized communities. Thank you for the opportunity. I give it back to you, Silas.
Thank you so much, Luciana, for that very, very good insights. We had another commenter. I don't know whether he's online, but we can give him 1 minute later on. David, I don't know if you're there. David? Not online at the moment. Maybe we can move straight into the Q&A section where we receive questions from the participants. We have Brian Okoth on standby. Are you there, Brian? And there afterwards we can proceed to give the panelists a chance to respond, and then we can close. Brian Okoth, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Great to hear from you, Brian. Please share your thoughts and questions.
So my questions were about the amendments on Article 177. So in the proposed amendment bill, there is a repeal of clause 2, where there is the deleting of some of the words that were used in the Constitution, which says the members who are part of the special seat members. In the Constitution, it was stipulated earlier that shall be nominated by political parties in proportion to the seats received in that election in that county by each political party under paragraph A, according to Article 90, which talks about party lists. But in the amendment bill, it says the members of the special seat will be elected through party lists by political parties in proportion to the votes received. So there's the aspect of being elected but not nominated, and also there's the aspect of according to the votes received, but not the seats. So what's the effect of these on devolution and governance? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brian Okoth, for your questions. Just to remind participants that you can ask questions on the Q&A section and the chat area. You can also raise your hand and voice your question. Any other participant who would like to voice their question? All right, I think we'll go on to give the panelists a chance to answer or to respond to the questions that have been raised both in the Q&A as well as the chat section. I'll first give a chance to Miss Roslyn Odede. Are you there? Hello, are you there, Miss Roslyn? Yeah, you might need to unmute. There you are. I think you must have heard that we had skipped you, but we hadn't skipped you. We have you in mind.
No.
So we'd like to give you the first chance to speak out your reaction about the presentations and answer some of the questions that have been asked. Over to you, Ms. Odede.
Thank you very much. Looking at the questions, and there's nothing directly related to the piece of presentation that I made. Just going through them. So I think the one question that Jane probably asked was the effect of moving the 47 women from the National Assembly to the Senate, and which is the house that is more powerful? Is it a more powerful house in Senate? I think very the Constitution actually provides the functions of both Senate and the National Assembly, and they're very clear and distinct in terms and in functions. And I think all this contestation we've been having about an upper house and a lower house is a very, very unnecessary conversation in our system, because our system does not contemplate an upper house and a lower house. They are both houses of parliament with very distinct roles. The Senate deals with county matters and the National Assembly deals with national government matters. And of course, there are areas where they have nexus over budgeting, allocation of funds and other issues. So I think that issue shouldn't really be coming up in terms of representation. But I could say this, Jane, The National Assembly, as constructed in the proposed constitutional amendment bill, is going to be a house from which cabinet ministers will be drawn, from which the prime minister will be drawn, from which deputy cabinet ministers will be drawn, and from which the deputy prime ministers can be drawn. So there are opportunities for getting appointments to the executive if that structure goes through in the National Assembly, which do not exist in the Senate. And in making the elected women go to the Senate and retain, and this is something we can forecast, that there'll be very few women elected directly to the National Assembly. We are therefore limiting opportunities for the women to serve in the executive. And I think that's something that needs to be remembered. And of course, the issue that Senator Omogeni raised around the NGAF funds, the National Government Affirmative Action Fund, which is available right now to the 47 county MPs. And it's a very small budget, 7 million per county. But the women have been able to show that they can do so much with 7 million as opposed to what some people do with their CDF funds. So it is important to allow this access to funds. And there's therefore going to be a situation where these funds will not be available to counties because there will be no county reps in the assembly. And going on to Senate, they will be divorced from this fund. And there's a way that development can be genderized, and therefore having a woman having the funds and using it towards development translates into certain gains that wouldn't be there if it was not a woman using those funds. So it's important that women access funds which can be used at county level to improve development. So that would be the distinction, I would say, in terms of moving women to Senate, and as opposed to keeping them in the National Assembly. Probably what will happen, therefore, is for senators to move for a fund to be given to all senators, male and female, for also affirmative action at the grassroots and at county level. And maybe we'll be seeing amendments towards that come the next Senate. The other thing I would like to point out here is that in terms of the sanctions around a party failing to comply. Luciana said we have statutes that are provided for this, which we have not implemented. And I totally agree. There's so much in our statutes that are not implemented because it is through statute that we actually empower constitutional provisions. But I think it is powerful if we have these provisions for sanctions in the Constitution, because placing it in the Constitution now gives it more power in terms of seeking compliance later. Because you can see that the provisions are not just for parties to send in gender compliant lists to IEBC, but it also gives power to IEBC to reject those lists. And I think that this being a constitutional power will actually cause parties to implement these provisions to the benefit of gender. I just still agree with you and still feel that other minorities, marginalized, and PWDs have not been adequately provided for. So that's what I would say right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Odede, for those insights. We'll go to Dr. Odote. Dr. Odote, I think my colleague has a follow-up question to him.
Yeah, I think, Dr. Odote, as you make your remarks, I think you can maybe respond to Brian, since you gave us an interpretation of Article 177. There was the concern by Brian, what is the consequence of changing that, the wording from nominated to elected of the special seats in the county assembly?
Yeah, great. And I would maybe just a follow-up question on that. I think Luciana has really mentioned a very important area of electoral dispute resolution. So Dr. Odote, what also are your views about the proposed framework within the BBI in terms of electoral dispute resolution? Over to you, Dr. Odote.
To start with that last question, I think the changes in terms of disputes in the constitutional proposals are useful, the consequent amendments in the Elections Act are confused and needs to be dealt with. The proposals in the Constitution are twofold for electoral dispute. One has been spoken about by Luciana and by Dr. Akombe, in terms of removing the powers on dispute resolution from IEBC. I belong to a group of people in 2016 made that proposal to the former commission, and I remember Chairman Isaac vehemently opposing that and his team. In the run-up 2017, thankfully, when the current commission actually agreed to an MOU between themselves and PPDT, I think that the powers for dispute resolution requires to be removed from IEBC. It needs to go to PPDT. So we leave it to manage elections, not again to then resolve disputes. So for me, that proposal is useful. What has not been done is the Elections Amendment Act and the Political Parties Act does not then capture a lot of the proposals that were made in the run-up to 2017, including by the Judiciary Committee of Elections. I had the privilege of supporting the JC in the run-up to 2017. And those proposals were twofold. Number one was to ensure that we increase the number of members of the tribunal, of the PPDT. And two, it was to ensure that the PPDT is decentralized. And number three was to ensure that the appeals that are from PPDT do not go all the way to the Supreme Court. If you look at 2017, the political parties disputes tribunal decisions went all the way to the Supreme Court and came back. I think if we want to have a dispute resolution mechanism that makes sense, PPDT should actually be almost the final place where you resolve dispute and only one type of BBI makes proposals for one type of appeal for the rest for enter the Court of Appeal. I think that proposal needs to capture all electoral disputes. That when you have MCS, let them stop at the High Court. When you have PPDT appeal, let them stop at the High Court. That's I think something that requires to be dealt with. The second point that nobody has addressed in terms of dispute resolution, I think is useful. I think the judiciary has over the years complained about the short 14-day period for listening to presidential petitions. BBI proposes that to go to 30 days, that is in consonance with what judiciary has been proposing for a long time. I think for me, that is also a full proposal. So from a dispute resolution mechanism, I think they are useful proposals that go on. As I said towards my last issue, is that that is done without us addressing the fund issues around IEBC that's required to have been addressed. We now run away from it. I think to sneak it back once the constitutional amendments have been passed, unfortunately. The question is the question from Brian, which is about Article 177. I think the idea behind the change from nominations to election is largely to address, I think, the concerns around KC, Dr. Kombe and Senator Okongo's neighboring county, where women who have gone to the county assembly through are seen as nominated, seen as not having mandate, and as that are not even allowed to sit in committee. So I think the idea is to say that everybody who goes through an assembly is elected. The only thing that changes is how they get elected. Some get elected directly from constituencies, others get elected through the party list. Well, if you look at Article 1771, Article 1771 actually talks about elections. A county assembly shall consist of, and then it talks about A, B, C. But when you go to two then assumes that the ones and the top-ups and the persons with ability are nominated. And I think what BBI is seeking to do is to correct that error by now ensuring that everybody who goes to the county assembly is seen as elected, whether through the party list or directly, which for me is a useful thing from a governor's perspective. Hopefully, it will address some of the challenges around KC. I don't think it will address people's perceptions that these people have been given free seats, which is the challenge that Roslyn Odede was complaining about. And those are challenges that I think we need to address through different mechanisms. We can't address them by changing the law. We must address them by socializing our minds. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Odote, for that. Please allow me to bring Senator Omogeni at this point. I think it's very important because of the things that Dr. Odote has just mentioned. Senator Omogeni, your quick reactions and responses to the questions by participants and also the panelists. Over to you, Senator. I have to unmute, Senator.
Good. Sorry. Now you can hear me?
Very well.
Yeah, I think first is to really thank the panelists and ICJ for organizing this forum, because it gives us an opportunity to really pick the minds of Kenyans on the entire BBI process and how Kenyans perceive this process. I said at the beginning that we are setting a precedent on how we will be undertaking these referendums in future, because this is the very first time we are doing a referendum under our 2010 constitution. So I'm happy with the observations that have been made, especially the clarification on this issue of nomination vis-a-vis elected members in the county assembly, the issue of how we proceed forward with a yes or no, the issue that again brings to the fore the debate whether between the National Assembly and the Senate, which is the upper house. But really, if you go to jurisdictions like the US, there's been a long fight between, House of Representatives and the Senate on who should be superior. In fact, at times they even used to have disagreements as to whether a mediation of a bill should take place at the precincts of the House of Representatives or at the Senate, because that is an indication of who is senior. If you move to the Senate, it means the House of Representatives is the junior one. Now, the issue of so this debate will always be there, but the court has helped us to clarify our legislative mandate, especially the decision that we got in petition 284 of 2019, which really says that legislative mandate is a shared function of the Senate and the National Assembly. So the courts are helping us a lot in trying to clarify our roles. This issue of 6 elections, we had made a proposal to the BBI Secretariat to separate elections of senators and members of National Assembly, just like it's done in jurisdictions where you have a bicameral parliament. Like in the US, the senators serve for a term of 6 years, House of Representatives serve for 2 years. In Australia, the House of Representatives serve for 4 years, senators 6 years, so that you have midterm elections that does not make the ballot to be too long and almost confusing. But that was not carried on board, and maybe I hope that when we get an opportunity, as Rosalyn Odede says, in future dates, these are issues that may be clarified. Otherwise, I think the others were comments from the panelists. We accept their view, and I really want to thank ICJ for having organized this forum. Unless there is a question that you really want me to clarify, I think that should be it from me.
None, Senator. None, Senator. Thank you so much for those reactions. I'll go to Luciana. Luciana, are you there? Just 1 minute.
Sorry about that. I don't think I have anything useful to add besides echoing what Dr. Odote has said about the appeals process. I had omitted to also mention that in terms of gains from the report. I think one of the things that we have decried in the last 2 electoral cycles is the power of the Supreme Court to adjudicate over election appeals arising from the High Court all the way to the Supreme Court. It was not anticipated that appellate jurisdiction would exist when we amended Section 85 in 2013. And there has been a lot of concern about whether it is strengthening or watering down the electoral dispute resolution process. We've seen what has happened recently with the East African Court of Justice, talking about the formalistic culture that has come to characterize the Supreme Court's decisions on election matters and how that has crippled the jurisprudence in that area. So as Dr. Odote has said on that issue, I think that would be a gain. Do I think we need to anchor it in the Constitution? No, I think we can anchor it in a further amendment to Section 85. But if anchoring it in the Constitution appears to give it greater weight, there is no harm. But again, thank you also for including me in this discussion. I have really enjoyed and learned a lot from the discussion that has gone on today. Asante sana.
Thank you, Luciana. We'd like to finish this session with remarks from Dr. Akombe.
Maybe just, Silas, can I ask, are we at the end? Are we finishing the session? Is this the concluding remarks of the whole thing?
So we will give you one chance for you to give your parting shots, just parting shots in the next session. But for now, you can give us your reaction and maybe just highlight some of the things that have been answered. Sorry, everyone, that will take a bit of your few minutes after the time that we had mentioned. Over to you, Dr. Kombe.
No, thank you very much for that clarification. I mean, I thought it's really important for us to keep going. I mean, of course, when you're having conversations with mostly lawyers, it ends up going into a conversation about the legalese and the various changes. But we actually need to go back to the reality of what we were supposed to discuss, of the core to this problem. That at the core of it is a political crisis. At the core of it is an issue in which those laws, those institutions have not been respected at all. And the need really for a genuine conversation that brings us back to what it will take to have electoral integrity and electoral justice. The problem is not in the law. I mean, we are one of the most, how can I say, like legislated election management systems that we have. So the problem that we have is not that we don't have the laws or that the laws are really faulty. The problem is that we have not reached a place whereby we as citizens want to hold our leaders accountable for impunity. We are not ready to question things that are not going on well, and we're not ready really to fight for electoral justice and inclusion of women and all those other things that we've talked about. That are really important. I mean, you look at some of the changes that have been, like for me, some of the profound changes that would have made the commission to be stronger would have been more things that don't need to go to changing the constitution, frankly. It's looking at the IEBC Act and making changes on the IEBC Act and the Election Act. It's looking at how do you make sure that you avoid the two centers of power. And that you don't have to go to the Katiba. You don't have to change the constitution. You just need to be able to change the provisions that are there under the IEBC Act so that you have your chief executive officer to also be the chair of the commission, like we have in Ghana. And we're having elections in Ghana right now. Are you hearing, them going and fighting and killing each other? No, they're not, because it's about fixing the politics. And it's about having a commission that is allowed to do its job. And when it doesn't do its job, then it's called to account. Like when there were issues with the 2016 elections in Ghana, there was a tribunal where Charlotte Osei went through a tribunal and she was removed through a process. You could argue that it was a political process, politically motivated process, but it was a legal process because they have a mechanism, a legal mechanism for being able to take people out of office when they go out of order. But those are the kind of things that we refuse to do. So what we do is that anytime we have an issue with the way elections are conducted, we want to sweep the commission out. We want to sweep the staff out. We are not addressing the issues that Kriegler put out as some of the problems. So we are ready to come up with acts that are going to say, okay, we are going to vet the staff again. The problem is not the staff. You have some of the best staff, as I've said before, you have some of the most qualified. They want to do the right thing. They have a job. All that they're dealing with is politicians who want to manipulate the system. So how do you fix that? You fix that by giving positions actually of the chair to somebody of integrity like Roselyn Odede and saying, we have seen you perform before. You have something, you can stand up for something, you have stood up for something before. We saw you vetting judges as a vice chair of that panel, and we saw what you did. You don't go picking up people from nowhere and make them chairs of commission that have never stood for anything in their life. They've never been tested, they've never been tried, and you're having them run 6 elections on one day. You're expecting them to have integrity when that integrity has never been tested at all. So really, we can talk about the laws that we can change, we can talk about the various things that we can fix, but until we address the real core of the problem, which is really the politics and the impunity and the continuous abuse of institutions, the state capture of institutions, the plutocracy that we have, the tribal kingpins who either win the election or, who use violence to, state violence, as we have seen on many occasions, to keep themselves in power, or those who lose using actually the people power violence to be able to negotiate for better deals in a handshake. So, I mean, I think those are the things we need to be addressing. Those are the things we need to be thinking about. The problem is not the law. I repeat again, the problem is not the law. The problem is really on how do you go back to the Kriegler report and look at what were the issues that were highlighted there. We look at the Waki Commission report and look at those issues that were highlighted there. You try and fix those problems, not change the constitution. That's not where the problem is. It's with the politics. Let's fix the politics. Thank you.
Thank you, Daktari.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Kombe. It's really hard to say anything after that. The problem is not the law. The problem is our politics. And really, as we give our parting shots, it brings us to the core. And I think what is of interest to every other Kenyan is the BBI report or the proposals in the BBI, the answer to the political and election-related violence in the future elections. I think panelists, as you give your parting shots, as somebody asked, it might not be a yes or no question. It might be a multi-answer questions, but I think in just 1 minute or so, as you close, kindly address that question. Thank you. We start with Senator Omugeni.
Thank you. To answer your question, we need to look at what is happening in the United States of America and look at the conduct. I'm sorry to say I should not be discussing a president of another sovereign state. But when you look at the reactions from United States President Donald Trump, it reminds us that a country can only survive if we have strong institutions, and if people who are entrusted with public office hold those positions in trust and on behalf of the Kenyan people. If we didn't have strong institutions in the United States of America, I think we would have seen chaos in that country. So I think what will hold us together going forward is building confidence in our institutions. We need to have in place an IEBC that fully enjoys the confidence of Kenyans. We need to continue supporting the independence of the judiciary so that if there is any dispute emanating from presidential, gubernatorial, senatorial, and parliamentary elections, people have confidence that the court dispute mechanism can resolve those disputes without fear and favor and in a very brave manner. We need to have a provincial administration that is political, that does not show open partisanship, so that people have a right to participate in elections. We need political parties that are not ethnicized, that accord opportunities to members of those political parties to pursue their political goals to the highest level possible. So in totality, we cannot just look at BBI as an answer to our problems, but we need to do soul searching on our own individuals as Kenyans and ensure that we have a culture that does not build in us aspects of negative ethnicity or creating a political competitive climate that is not conducive for the survival of our country. Really.
All right, I think we lost a senator.
Yeah, I think we go on with Ms. Odede, your parting shot in a minute.
Ms. Odede, are you
there? Yes, I am.
Great.
And thank you very much. I think in my last remarks, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, so in my last remarks, I'm just going to say that I think the referendum process has been initiated because the signatures are being collected. So it is our responsibility, I think, therefore, to ensure we monitor the referendum process so that we ensure it is credible, fair, and within the statutory provisions. We need to ensure that we conduct civic education so that we encourage Kenyans to know what is the content of this draft constitutional amendment bill, and so that they can be able to make informed choices. Enable people to know the consequences of a yes or no vote without determining for them how they will vote, but just giving them that civic education. Focus, I think, let's not lose focus that 2022 is coming. So we need to also focus on credible elections being conducted in 2022. And most of all, let us fix IEBC because since Dr. Kombe left and the other commissioners left, we have a limping IEBC. So I do not know how this IEBC is going to conduct a credible referendum as it is currently constituted. So one of the things maybe we need to be asking for immediately is reconstituting IEBC to its full composition so that it can then conduct the referendum. Those would be my last remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Odede. Dr. Kombe.
So, you know, I'll just speak to the question about generally as a conclusion on whether having the amendment or having the BBI is going to lead to less political violence or, you know, a better environment for free, fair and credible elections. I mean, my sense is that when you start, you know, you have a BBI that begins from the premise that, from the wrong premise really, that the country's problems, it starts from the premise that the country's problems are because of a winner takes it all in politics, and that our problems are also based on tribalism. And we know that that is not true. In a democracy, if you're talking about a democracy is about winner takes it all. That's actually what it is, unless we want to change our system of governance to have anarchy or to communism or something else, or a monarchy. The ideal, the definition of a democracy is that you're going to have elections, you're going to have a winner, and the winner will govern, and you're going to have a loser who's going to have to serve as a watchdog. So it's that, you know, so to start to have a BBI process that promises you that it's going to take away the winner takes it all approach is wrong, actually, because that undermines the whole essence of democracy, because democracy is about having an opposition and that waits and sells its program and hopes that it's going to be elected when you have the next election. And to argue that tribalism, you know, we just all of a sudden, you know, me living in Dunga with my Luo neighbors and being half of each or different ethnic groups, that we just realize one day around election day that we come from different groups and start killing each other. It's wrong. It's basically that it's not tribalism. That's not our problem. We have several tribes in Ghana. We have not seen people killing each other because of tribe, because of elections. We have several tribes here in the US, by the way. And now that Senator Okongo spoke about the US elections, I will say it very openly, that yes, you could have, you did, we saw actually what we saw was a reflection of a system that works. That even when you have a leader that might decide to insist to be in office, the institutions will work. When you have people of integrity whom he will call even in the middle of the person, you know, certifying the results, the person will look at the phone, put it down, and continue to certify the results. That shows that institutions work. That shows that people of integrity, when given positions, and again, I say, if you give Rosalind Odede that position as chair of the commission, if we had several of Rosalind Odedes there and Rosalind Akombes in that commission, I can assure you that we would have not declared that result. You needed to have a chair that has the backbone, that has the muscle, that will be able to say, no, I am not signing off as the national returning officer for this election. And I am sure if you had people like Rosalind Odede or Rosalind Akombe, it runs in the Rosalins, we could have actually, as chair of the commission, we could have said no. But when you are a member of a commission, you only have one vote. And if you have, as it happened all the time, you have one vote and you lose that vote because it's based on consensus of voting. But if I was chair and the returning officer, you would have seen a different thing because you're chair. So just to say that it is not tribalism that is the result that is causing our elections to be violent. It is not the winner takes it all, because that is what democracy is about. It's about plutocrats and tribal kingpins who use tribe to gain power, or whether in the ruling party or in the opposition. So until we make that that role of theirs so expensive, until we make it impossible, or we show them that they cannot be rewarded for causing violence, then we will continue. As long as we continue rewarding them, that every time they cause violence or they threaten that they're going to cause violence, we all run and say, okay, now let's do BBI, let's do a handshake, so that it's moral hazard in economics. That's what they say. So you'll encourage the bad behavior, because they know that all they need to do is just threaten violence in Rift Valley, and you will all vote for them in. Or threaten to go to Kibera and get the young men and women out in the streets, and you will give them what they want. No, we have to get to a point whereby we end this pattern whereby politicians keep using violence, and it's the politicians that use violence to gain political ends. We just have to get to a point where we say no. And maybe next time, as an end, maybe give Rosalind Odede the chair of the commission, and you will see the changes. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Akombe, for those very good insights and very touching remarks. We'll go ahead to ask Luciana just to give us a parting shot, Luciana.
Thank you, Silas. I'm amused by Dr. Akombe. I was just smiling when she was making her closing remarks, because I had the picture in my mind of that governor signing results when Trump was calling, and it was hilarious. And I think, as you're saying, and this is where I'd like to end, there needs to be a sober judgment when we approach the questions of BBI, how we look at the BBI in terms of what it can give us and what it can't deliver to us. I think that is it's important to have a sober discussion around that, rather than a political discussion, rather than having an emotive discussion about it. I think it's important to approach what it offers with sober judgment. But secondly, to also approach ourselves as people with sober judgment. We cannot continue to externalize our problems. We must ask ourselves, how did we end up here? How will we end up where we will be in 2022? What can we do to change the narrative? No change will ever happen until a personal revolution happens. And I think that's where I'd like to end the discussion for today. Thank you again for the invitation. I was honored to be part of the discussion.
Yeah, thank you very much, Luciana. And to close us off, Dr. Odote, your parting shot.
Thank you very much. I agree on some things that Dr. Akombe said, and disagree on the others. I think our biggest problem is that we think that law is the solution to all problems. And I think Rosalind said that. I agree with that. In my view, I think the diagnosis that BBI made is not fully wrong. I think winner takes all is a conversation I'm happy to have. I think tempering the winner takes all mentality is a useful thing. Tempering it doesn't mean that the losers only ones that you accommodate the losers. It means actually devolution is about tempering takes all. Colleagues of mine and myself had an opportunity of writing around this in 2017. I think they offers you an opportunity. I think strengthening the opposition, dignifying the opposition offers you an opportunity of ensuring that we don't have a winner takes all mentality. I think the bigger problem, identified this, the bigger problem is that we have politicized our institutions. We need politics to drive everything. Integrity does not pay, doing the right thing does not pay. I don't think that making Rosalind Odede chair of BC all the I think I think the bigger problem to deal with, and I was hoping BBI would deal with it. BBI 1 talks about software. We need to ask ourselves in the face, must politicians control everything? Must we all pander to the whims of politicians? What do we need to do to ensure that institutions that are credible? It's not just about the individuals, because individuals, I think we put too much faith on individuals, and individuals operating in a context that does not make sense will eventually not deliver for us. I think the difference with the US is that the individuals operate in a context where individualism cannot triumph. Processes cannot triumph institution. That's why even if the individual is as strong as Trump, can't then go against the institution. But we are in a country where institutions rule, where politicians determine everything, will manipulate the process of choices, they will interfere with the choices, and if necessary, they will kill for purpose of getting whatever they want. And I was hoping that that's the conversation we are going to have in terms of how do we reset our software so that we can have a country process where rules make sense. If we don't do so, then the process of changing rules will give us some changes, but those changes will not lead to fundamental change. It's for that reason that I think whatever we do for the BBI process, whether we adopt it or does not adopt it, I think we still have not addressed the fundamental issues of why politics still ethnic driven, why our politics still violent. And I fear our 2022 elections, the current framework, will actually deliver for us more of the same. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Odote, and thank you everyone who has joined us for this conversation. Indeed, we have enjoyed having you. We have enjoyed interacting with you, and we invite you to continue interacting with us on our various social media platforms as we move on with this conversation of BBI. And I think my takeaway is that we as Kenyans must, I think that's the bottom line. We must take responsibility. We must not leave it up to the political class to make decisions for us. We ought to recognize that we only have Kenya, and unlike them who might be able to go elsewhere, we might not have that option. So I think for us, we must take the responsibility to engage with this BBI process and ensure we are fully aware of the consequences of our decision when the time comes. And I think at this point, as we close it, I invite Silas to make a short vote of thanks.
Thank you so much, Jane. Benjamin Franklin, President Benjamin Franklin said that the Constitution only gives people the right to pursue happiness. However, it is to us to catch it. Indeed, it is our responsibility to ensure that the process is inclusive and collaborative. Let us all actively engage in deliberations to share best practices, to share challenges, lessons learned, and come up with solutions that will stand the test of time. During the holidays, let's all take time to read this report, the BBI report, both 1, 2, and 3. Let's compare it to the constitution that we have right now and educate our people on the proposals that are there so that they can be able to make informed decisions about these critical issues. As a commission of jurists, we always call for open and constructive dialogue on any proposals regarding the constitutional reforms in the country. We call for a united and stronger Kenya. So my colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, friends, family, let us take this opportunity to thank our panelists who have brought here with them and shared with us their knowledge and experiences. You have guided our deliberations in the right directions, and we really truly appreciate that. We understand that you have taken time out of your very important schedules. Dr. Rosalina Kombe, I think right now is 5. You had to wake up, I think, at 2 a.m. in the morning for you to prepare. So thank you so much, we really appreciate. We thank you for your invaluable contribution, all of you, all the panelists, and the participation of all participants on Zoom, Facebook, Twitter, and other social media sites. We would also like to sincerely thank, I would also like to sincerely thank my colleagues at ICJ Kenya, the council, both at the council and the secretariat, and particularly the technical team behind the scenes who have worked tirelessly around the clock to ensure that this webinar series is a success. Let us not forget the wise words of Roosevelt, who said, if it is not us, then who? It has been our pleasure to moderate these discussions, myself and Jane. And I really wish you a great afternoon ahead, a great holiday, and a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Thank you so much, and have a great evening ahead. Once again, thank you. God bless you, and God bless Kenya.